Next talk will be held by Mark Bates from Papercall. This is a kind of workshop, so it is longer, it is more interactive, so enjoy that.
Hey everybody, you all saw me from this morning probably, or some of you saw me from this morning. So I'm not going to do the big introductions like Fabio said. I'm from Papercall, which ran the CFP for this conference. I'm also from Gopher Academy, which is the organization that runs the largest GopherCon in the world in Denver every year. Matter of fact, our CFP is open right now, so it closes at the end of the month. So if you want to speak at GopherCon in Denver, I highly recommend you submit a CFP through Papercall. Strange how that works, isn't it? Things just come together. I'm also the developer of Buffalo, which you've probably heard talked about today, which is a Rails-style web framework. We'll look at it in a little bit. But I did want to just very quickly show this. This is a valid sentence in the English language. Buffalo, 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 buffalo is a parsable, meaningful sentence in the English language. And to understand that, you need to understand three things. You need to understand there's a city called Buffalo. There is the animal, buffalo. And then there's a verb, buffalo, which means to outwit or confuse or deceive something. So really, this sentence kind of reads, the buffalo from the city of Buffalo, who are buffaloed by buffalo from the city of Buffalo, buffalo other buffalo from the city of Buffalo. So there you go. Here's a fun thing. The English language, it's just stupid. I love the English. It's just so stupid. Anyway, so that out of the way. Let's talk about web stuff, shall we? So here's what I was thinking, and y'all can tell me what you want to do, because you know what, this is an informal thing. We're just going to have fun. I'm going to be in Vim, and you're going to be in chairs, and I'm drunk, and it's going to be a great, great time. No, I'm not drunk-ish. So I've got this project we've got here. I can sit here and I can go from we know nothing about web all the way up through all these stuff. This is actually 2 days worth of material, so we're not going to get to it all today. But I was thinking we'd play with some of this stuff and then maybe take a look at Buffalo and see how you can actually just get started and not need to know all this stuff here. So who here has done web programming in Go before? A few people. Okay, so let's very quickly review some basics then, shall we? Let's see here. Okay, a simple web server. Told you, it's going to be really just, and feel free and just shout out questions. They don't have to be about web or Go. They can be what I had for lunch today, the name of my youngest child, my mother's maiden name, the last 4 digits of my social security number, the dog I had as a child. Anything that would help you hack into my passwords, I'm more than happy to tell you. It's okay, my password's password, or password 1, depending on the site, if they need more security. So, you know, just, you'll be fine. I trust you. You seem like good peoples. You really do. 1, 2, 3, 4, that's also my PIN number. So anyway, this here is a very, very simple web application in Go. If you don't believe me, I'll run it here, and we can go to localhost 3000 and hello world. Waha! Woohoo! There we go. I did that in a lot less time than Eleanor did today. So what's really happening here in our code? Well, we're doing some very, very basic stuff. And I think Eleanor touched on it a little bit, but she had to kind of jump off at the end as soon as she was getting to this stuff. So inside the standard library, inside our net HTTP package, they're kind of hiding a lot of stuff for us. They've kind of got a default muxer in there, and a muxer at the very, very core of it is essentially a router, if you kind of think of it that way. It's a pattern map to a function that does something. So inside the standard library, we're using that right now. We can say we want to handle some sort of a function here. I'm just going to jump down to ZT. Oops. I'm just going to delete code randomly, wildly. There we go. I'm going to say, dear HTTP, I want you to handle the root, anything that comes into slash. And when you see slash, I want you to call this function. And that function I've defined above here. And the definition of that function, the interface of that function is it takes a response writer and a request. So a response and a request, very common things in web programming, if you've seen those before. I'm sure you have. And this here is actually an interface type. So any function that defines this interface of taking a response writer and a request implements this interface. And we will look at the serve HTTP, the handle interface in a minute, the handler interface in a minute. We pass that in, then we call listen and serve. And what listen and serve is going to do, if you notice, we've got port 3000 mapped here, so launch on port 3000. And then we're giving it nil, and nil is saying, don't worry about a muxer, just use the internal muxer inside the HTTP package, the default muxer. So when we run that, that's what's going to happen. It's going to start in port 3000. It's going to use the internal muxer. When a request comes into slash, it's going to find it. It's going to call that function, give it the response, give it the request, and we're just going to print out hello world. Make sense? Fabulous. That's the end of the talk. Thank you for coming out. I really appreciate it. You've been a good crowd. Matt Ryer is going to talk about Gomnioth now for the next hour and 25 minutes. So, no. So that's a basic web app. Have I lost anybody already? Brilliant. Okay, I'm doing terrible then because I was really hoping to lose people there. That's my bad. That's my bad. Sorry, I was hoping, you know. Let's look at a slightly more complex version of the exact same thing. I feel like Eleanor doing the hello world thing here, right? I'm doing it 100 different ways to Sunday. This time, instead of using the default serve mux that's in the HTTP package, I'm going to create my own serve mux. So I can do that by calling new serve mux. And then this is going to work exactly the same as it was before. I can map things to different endpoints. So at slash, I want this hello world endpoint, and at slash foo, I want hello foo. I was going to map a Fibonacci generator, because that's what all web apps work on. But I decided not to. So anyway, doing all this, I can now take that mux and I can pass it in here where I was passing in nil before. And now I have this muxer I can do with. I can pass it around to different places. I can also mount muxers on top of muxers on top of muxers. But that's another story for another day. So again, if I run this here, if you don't believe me, there we go. It works. And I can even go to foo. Wow. I am just kicking ass, right? Thank you. Thank you. So this guy gets it. This very well-dressed, dapper man. Where are you from, sir?
Strasbourg.
From where?
Yeah, I know. Strasbourg, east of France.
Oh, France. Okay, very nice. Yes, I spent a weekend there 1 month. Okay. That wasn't right. I spent a month there 1 weekend is what I was looking for. I'm going there next week, so I'll look you up. Not that place, though, because I've never heard of it. Anyway, I'm sure it's lovely. Anyway, yes, we have a working app now. I can ship it. I can go for a beer. I am done. Amazing. Unfortunately, though, there's probably more work to be done on this application here. So let's start looking at things a little bit more. Let's look at the handler interface. Now, what's interesting about the handler interface is obviously anything can implement it. And to implement it, all we need is this function, this serve HTTP function. And it takes the exact same interface, exact same parameters as our handler func did, a response and a request. Here I have a simple little struct, very simple struct called app, and it has a serve HTTP on it. So knowing that, I can now pass that directly into my listen and serve down here at the bottom. And the reason being is listen and serve is actually looking for an interface of type handler. So this works just like it did before. If you don't believe me, there you go. Hello world. I'm magical. The nice thing about this is now we can start getting into really interesting things. We can do all sorts of different stuff with this. If we can have structs that implement serve HTTP and not just functions, right? We can start building kind of bigger and more interesting applications. Is everybody still following along? Yeah? Or you've just tuned out entirely? I'm just trying to make sure. If you've tuned out, that is totally cool, because I got some stuff to do, emails to catch up on. So that's cool. OK. Thank you very much. OK, so let's look at something a little more interesting here, where I have an application now. And inside that application, I have a handler func. Now, this is just any function that takes a response and request, just like we saw in the very, very first slides here. But we can make this implement handler very easily by implementing the serve HTTP and then just passing it off to that function. So down here, you can see I'm calling wrap my handler and giving this the handle interface, which is expecting a handler, not a handler func. So now I've converted my function into a handler. And in the standard library, if we go to handle func here, let's see, this works. It doesn't work. Fatigue, it doesn't work. Just saying. Fix it. Here we go. That'll work. Let's look at, there we go. Let's look at what this is doing. So I showed you this because this is what we were doing in the earlier slides, right? We were saying HTTP handle func, giving it a mapping and then a function. But what is that doing under the covers? Well, we see the default serve mux, which we knew we were calling earlier. If we go to that, it's calling this mux handle, and it's actually calling this handler func, which is basically doing exactly what we were talking about before. Notice now it is wrapping it with the survey. Actually, this is actually a much cooler implementation than mine, in that it's actually defining a function on the function, which is pretty baller. I love that a lot. That's really cool. So this is now implementing the handler interface by implementing a function on the function, which just calls itself. Yeah, that's right. Some nice little pseudo-meta programming in Go. So interfaces are huge. Once you understand these two interfaces, you're done. You've got basically all you need to do to write web applications, because that's all the standard library is all about. It's about these two types here. So let's go back up again. Back up my call stack here. Back up my call stack. Okay. Concurrency. Everybody loves this one. I bet you didn't know, little known fact, that Go is a highly concurrent language. No, it is. It's true. It's true. If you don't believe me, take a look at the one you're with. What's interesting about the standard library and the server that ships with the standard library is it too is highly concurrent right out of the box. So to prove that, let's look at a little code here. I am going to set up a new serve mux. On my mux, I'm going to set up a handler. Anything that comes in a slash, going to get called into this function here. All I'm going to do is print out the path that comes in, simulate some really terrible latency of 1 second, and then I'm going to write the status teapot out. That is an actual status code, by the way, 418. For those who don't know, it's the I'm a little teapot status code. I was told the 420 status code was not the appropriate status code to use at a conference, which is also a status code. If you don't believe me, look it up and you'll see. So down here, all I'm going to do is I am going to iterate 100 times, and I'm going to call my function, call my application 100 times and see what happens. And if I don't get the status teapot, I'm going to fatal a nice little oops here. So now in a language that's not Go, for example, what should we see? We'd see 1, 2, 3, 4, and it's going to take 100 seconds to run. When we run this in Go, they're all done. So right out of the box, Go spawns a Go routine for each incoming request. And that's awesome. That's so nice to do. I don't think I have any code that demonstrates this, but one thing you do not want to do is spawn a Go routine from within your handler function that is dealing with the request to the response, because those things may not exist later. So for example, let's just code it up, see what happens. Here we go, we'll do a little Go function here, and I'm going to say time.sleep for 1 more second. And after that, I'm just going to write some data out. Hi, there we go. And let's see what happens here. Never actually gets executed because the whole application is finished. But had it actually finished, which I could simulate with some really terrible code down here, which Fatih's not paying attention, is he? Good. You're not paying attention, Fatih. Go back to, oh, not Fatih, I meant Francesc. Francesc, go back to sleep. Don't pay any attention. Nope, that's actually correct. So you notice it never actually printed out the response because the response is closed at that point. I never got to print off the thing I wanted to print off. So when you're dealing with Go routines inside your handler functions, remember that. Keep that in mind that the response and the request are most likely not going to be there when the Go routine actually occurs, depending on what's happening in the Go routine and what you're doing with it. So it's perfectly okay to spawn Go routines from your request as long as those things are truly asynchronous you might not care about, or you're willing to use a wait group for and wait for before the response comes back. Did I lose everybody on that one? No? Fantastic. I am on fire today. Look at me. Who's better than me? Nobody. That's right. Okay. I can't quit stuff in Vim. How many readmes do I have open? There we go. Okay, let's look at some basic testing stuff in Go for testing web apps, because this one always gets people a little bit. I feel like there are a bunch of different ways to do testing of web apps, and I'll show you a few of the ways that I do it, and it depends a little bit on what kind of level of testing I'm trying to do. So, oops, GF, there we go. So here I have a handler. Very simple, takes response and writer and a request and says hello world. Now I want to test it. So one of the first things I can do is I can create a request just like I would to talk to an API, Twitter's API, for example. So I want to create a new request of type get that goes to a URL. In this particular case, the URL isn't important because I'm going to be testing a handler directly. When you start testing a kind of an application stack and going through a muxer, the URL becomes very important because the muxer needs to know what it's trying to find for you. And nil is basically the body that gets sent with the request. So next up here, I can create a new test recorder. And this implements the response writer interface. But what's really nice about it is it actually records the entire response so you can look at it later in your tests and do things with it. So now I can call my handler directly because I have a response writer, I have a request, I can do what I need to do, and then I can actually test to make sure that my response body came out the way I expect it to. And let's see if this works here. Ooh, that worked. Look at that. Fantastic. I'm so good. You guys are not impressed. Whatever. That's fine. You're not impressed. I don't care. Wow, what's going on over there? Okay, GF here. Did that all make sense? Yeah? So, heard a buffalo going by here. Okay, so this is just the same thing, but with a mux. Okay, this one, I love this one a little bit here. I'm actually going to skip to with a handler. There we go. Okay, and this is the approach I take more often than not when I'm dealing with applications that I'm building. The reason I do this is because I want to test kind of the whole way down through all my middleware and router and everything else that I've got going on. In this particular app here, I've got an application that implements a serve HTTP interface, the handler interface with serve HTTP. This could be a router or a muxer, anything that implements this interface, and most things do if they want to work as HTTP apps. What I can do here is I can create a new test server. And this will actually spawn up an actual server on a port on your machine. That's why it is very important to call defer close on the very next line. You don't want to leave these things just kind of hanging out across your machine. With that, I can now do a standard HTTP GET client call across to this application. So in this case, I get the URL from the server that I started up because I don't know what that random port is and its location. So I'm saying, get me, localhost 54321, whatever it is, and make a call to it. And it's going to make the network call, and it's going to go through the entire serve HTTP stack, which might have middleware, it might have routers, might do all sorts of stuff. So the benefit of this for me, and this is the approach I always kind of take, is I get the full app. Right? I don't have to deal with, when I'm doing that earlier implementation where I was testing the handler directly, how do I set the the current user on there and make sure that they're authenticated and deal with session stuff that maybe I'm looking for. Maybe I'm looking for a cookie in that handler. How do I deal with that? How do I deal with, I can do all this using the standard packages that we use to talk to actual running servers somewhere in the world. So I really like this approach a lot for testing apps. Does this make sense? Yeah, everybody just bored? No? Okay. Remember, feel free, shout out questions. They do not have to be about this. They can be about anything you want. Anything you want, but okay, never mind. Okay, this is where it starts getting a little like, what do we want to talk about? So we can talk about post requests. Those are kind of dull. So we'll talk a little bit about forms here for a second. Here's a simple form. GF. So when you're using the standard library in the standard library Muxer, as you might hear sometimes people say, standard library has everything you need, and it totally does, but it's very building blockish. So in order to do things like switch on the HTTP verb, so it's a get, a post, a put, you have to actually deal with that in the standard library Muxer. So here I've got a handler that returns, that looks through the request method and handles the request appropriate if it's a get, if it's a post, or the status method is not allowed. I've got a simple form here. Now, one thing to notice in my form that I'm rendering is the first name here. Notice the capitalization on the first name. And that's because by default, it's going to get bound to the attribute on the struct with the exact same name. So that's very important. Just like in JSON or XML, when you serialize those and go, they default to whatever it is unless you tell it otherwise. So finally down here, my post handler, when the request comes in, I can parse the form, make sure the form is valid and pull out all the variables. And then finally, I can actually get those variables from the form here. So if I run this and go to hello world, oops, there we go. Like my UI, I designed that myself. Very proud. I just don't know if you guys don't even care anymore. It's brilliant. I'm just talking, and everybody's just like, that sounds good. Anyway, it worked. If you don't believe me, there it is. Yeah, okay. That's a form. Let's look at testing the forms here. Somewhere I've got testing, right? Yeah, I got testing everywhere. I tested all this stuff because I'm good like that. Test post, test get, Here we go. Again, I'm doing very simple things here. I'm creating my form using the URL values, which are actually arrays for a whole host of reasons I'm not going to get into. And then I'm going to use this HTTP package to perform a post against my test server that I spun up. Where did I spin it up? I spun it up somewhere, up here. I make that test call, and then I'm just validating that stuff comes back. I think people assume that testing HTTP stuff is harder than it actually is. The biggest struggles you will find are doing things like dealing with database transactions or kind of cleaning up and set up and tear down stuff. And for that, there are a lot of really great libraries, not Testify, but no, just kidding. I actually highly recommend Testify, which is maintained by Ernesto right there, and is the one I use almost exclusively. This does not use Testify because Bill Kennedy wanted me to keep it very standard library. But if you're not using Testify Require, you're missing out. It's so good. And the Suite stuff as well, which does setup and tear down, is really nice. Although I think I'm the only person who uses Suite. Am I the only person who uses it? Really? Oh, okay. I was hoping somebody does. Multipart forms. That's what I wanted to talk about. Yeah. Who wants to talk about multipart forms? Who doesn't care? Look at multipart forms here. So, multipart form is Fabio, ladies and gentlemen. Yeah, sure, okay, whatever. He's leaving. He's like, I'm out. This sucks. Wow. Okay, that's a vote of confidence when the room MC just leaves. That's it, I'm done. To the bar. Okay. Yeah, exactly. You should. Yeah, whatever. Oh, he's taking a phone call. Uh-huh. Whatever. It's like, oh, thank God you called me. You have no idea what I'm going through right now. And I can't leave because he picks on me. He knows who I am. I'm right there in the second row. I knew I shouldn't have worn the bow tie. Yeah, I know. Next time, no bow tie. Sorry. Okay. I'm losing my mind here a little bit. So I have an application here that's going to take files. It's going to upload files, right? That's a complicated thing, right? Yeah, it's complicated. Here is my file handler. Let's look at that for a second here. I get a form file, so it's off the request. There's a little function called form file, which does exactly what you think it does. Assuming the file is good and I don't get any errors parsing it, whatever. In this case, I'm just creating a little upload directory here, and the name, and then I'm writing the name I'm writing the file to disk, and closing the file. Oh, actually, here's where the actual copy is creating. I'm creating the file. And then I'm copying to the file, and then I'm done. That's it. That is uploading in Go, this one function. And this function does more than I actually needed to do, because here I could do some of this stuff in the init, for example. I could create the directory. Oh, he's back. How was the phone calls? Everybody okay?
Yeah, everybody's.
You sure?
Yeah.
Okay, good. Just checking.
Kids and everything.
Oh, fabulous. You have how many kids?
3.
3. Okay, what are their ages? Okay, let's look at the tests for that. Okay, here we go. Let's look at some tests. Very simple tests. Gonna clean up the upload dir after all the tests are done. I'm gonna start a new test server, and we actually want to look at the put here. I'm capturing the location of the image. I'm doing this so that later I can assert that the two images are exactly the same. That's what this open is all about here. I create a multi-part new writer. This is where things get a little bit tricky because I need to do multi-part requests for HTTP. But again, the standard library kind of has my back here, which is quite nice. I can, as part of this writer that I've opened up, I can create a new form file with the same name as I did, give it a path to the or name of the image. In this case here, I am now going to copy my local image into my multi-part writer. This is a little tricky stuff here. This is advanced. We're advanced now. Going to copy it all in there so that down here, I can actually do my upload. So I'm going to call post to my endpoint /upload, and I'm going to give it my bytes buffer now is my body. And within that, it has a multi-part. It's been written that multi-part file. So it's got the Gopher JPEG in there, or PNG in there, in the correct place with the correct names that I need. I need to make sure that my request is set to a content type of form data. So it's a multi-part type. Then I can make the request and assert that it's correct, and add a defer, and then I'm going to open up the original image down here, and then get the bytes, and then I'm just going to compare the two. So there you go. This is a lot of code. It's actually more code to test it than it is to actually implement it. But again, I'm kind of doing things very, very explicitly each step. There's a lot of code here that could get cleaned up and simplified to make this test even easier. But overall, it's pretty straightforward. So, with that said, this is where things get fun. Who wants to learn about Buffalo? Who wants to see Buffalo in action? Yeah, there we go. Okay. Let's do something fun. This is boring. Ugh. Okay. Buffalo. Yeah. Yay! Okay. Oops. Do I have like a weird Go path set? I think I do. Oh, I do have a weird Go path set. Echo, because I was playing with this earlier. No, that's the correct Go path. I just have a weird Z path set up. CD Mark Bates / Coke. Okay. I'm going to remove this. Of course, it's a folder. Okay. Now, I'm going to generate a new Buffalo app. What should we call it? Come on. I'm not calling it Buffalo, people. I'm not having Buffalo. Buffalo. Is that the right number of buffaloes? I think.
What's your mother maiden?
What's my mother's maiden name? Who's your favorite teacher in school? We're going to call it Coke. I always call it Coke. That's my default one here. Coke, as in Coca-Cola. So you can see here it's generating a lot of files. It's doing a lot of stuff. It's also generating a Webpack installation for me and a Webpack configuration, which is what it's doing. So it's doing an npm install right now. Yes, Fatih? What is Webpack? That is an excellent question. So Webpack is the latest hotness for front-end development. Yay. It's okay, because in like 3 months, I'm going to have to change it out to something else that's the new hotness in web development. But with the Webpack config that gets generated, we'll look at this in a second, supports ES6 out of the box. It also supports SCSS or SAS out of the box. I also threw in jQuery and Bootstrap for you right out of the box, so you can kind of just get up and running very quickly. But it'll watch your files, it'll compile your ES6 to the correct modern stuff that it's supposed to compile to, and the same thing with the SAS, and it'll copy your assets over to the right place and build them and compile and concat and do things. Things that smarter people who do front-end development do than I know. I kind of trust people when they say, this is the hotness this week. So, I know. So this here is my Buffalo app that just got generated. There's a lot of good stuff. You can see here, Buffalo's opinionated, very much so like Rails, right? I have decided this is the way I want Buffalo apps to be laid out. If you don't like it, then, go write your own Buffalo. So we've got a couple different dot files, and I'll explain buffalo.dev in a minute. Code Climate is, Code Climate. It's a testing service that, it's not a CI, but it actually runs GoVet, GoLint, and a few other things, so it's kind of a nice little default there. There is a .git ignore, Francesc, but it's not an actual Git repo, which is kind of interesting. So that should definitely become a Git repo. I totally agree. Then we have a README and an actions folder. This is all your actions going to go. This is where your business logic in terms of handling requests is going to go, all your endpoints. Assets are your JavaScripts, your style sheets, your images, that sort of stuff. Database YAML to configure your database. Grifs are kind of interesting. Who here comes from a Ruby background? 2 people. Okay. Then this analogy is lost on literally everybody else in the room. They're rake tasks for Go. They're very cool. I will show them to you all in a minute. Main.go, I think we all know what that is. Models, these are going to be your database models and or any other model-y type code you want to put in your app. Node modules is Node. Package.json is Node. Public is, public folder where all your assets will be compiled into. That can be served up. Templates folders where your HTML templates are going to go. And finally, Webpack config.js is the configuration for Webpack. We won't really spend too much time on it, but we'll look at it very quickly. So let's open this up here. And we'll start with these files down the bottom. So by default, I have generated a Postgres application here. I can change this to MySQL or SQLite, should I choose. And the first thing you want to do is you want to go and you want to update your YAML file to be the correct settings. Where is your database? Is it on the correct port? Is it named correctly? Is it the user and password that you expect it to be? And you notice down here at the bottom in production, get this weird little env or helper. And what that'll do is it'll look for a database URL environment variable, which is very common in production. But should you not have it, well, we'll fall back to kind of a more standardized URL format for you. So I think that's kind of helpful, but maybe you don't, so I don't care. Main.go, very simple here. Just print out start it up on port 3000 as default, or you can use your own port through the environment variables. Just print out the little thing there. Hey, we're starting Coke on port 3000. I should change that we're doing Coke on port 3000. And then start it up here with my application. Oops, I keep forgetting that I'm in the thing here. Package JSON, this is all NPM stuff. I'm not going to look at it, but spend too much time on it very quickly, though. You notice that I've got Babel in there, which lets you do ES6 right out of the box, Bootstrap, Sass, jQuery, Font Awesome's actually in there by default, in case you use Font Awesome. But all the stuff can be deleted and thrown away if you don't like any of it. So I like it. I put it in there because it gets me up and running. And then finally, down here is my Webpack. And all this is doing is setting up that kind of asset pipeline for me of making sure that everything is kind of compiled correctly and in the right places and stuff like that. So I'll let everybody kind of look at that on their own, and hopefully you'll understand it better than I do. That's what it is. So let's look at some actions. Actually, you know what? Let's actually start up the app. Who wants to do that? First thing I'm going to do is with the Buffalo command, well, I'm actually going to avert your gaze. I'm going to delete some databases first. Drop all, because I'd actually created these before. And then I'm going to create all. This is going to create all of my databases that are in my YAML file here. And now I can run Buffalo dev. And there we go. It's now, Buffalo dev is now watching all my assets with Webpack to compile them as they change. It's also watching all of my Go code as it changes and recompiling the binary and starting it up again every time I do that. So if we go to localhost 3000, whoa, hello, what do I got going on here? There we go. I think I had some caching going on there. Here we go, we got a welcome page here. Woohoo! This is all served through Buffalo, as you can see here. The logging looks a lot nicer when the screen's not this big. But it is all structured logging. In production, we actually store, we do JSON logs by default to disk, so if that's something you want, you can obviously change all that anytime you feel like it. Let's stop that. So let's look at the Buffalo command real quick. So under the Buffalo command, we have a whole bunch of really fun things here. Builds a Buffalo binary, and what's really nice about this is builds a Go binary, but it also bundles up all of your migrations, your assets, your templates, your images, literally everything into a single binary that you can drop anywhere in the world and execute. It's a thing of beauty, and I will show it to you now because it really is gorgeous. Buffalo build. If you have large amounts of assets, you can do -z, which does a zip as opposed to an append. Here we go, it ran Webpack, and it failed, because why did it fail? Error, migrations not on disk. I don't have any migrations, that's why. There are migrations. There we go. Oops, now it's supposed to be migrations. Yeah, it's better. I should auto-create that file. I don't know why it's not. Anyway, there we go. I also, as part of the binary, I also build in the date and time that it was built. I also will throw in a version, which typically would be the Git SHA that you built it against, but this isn't a Git project, so I used the time as the version, which is very, very nice. So now in my bin folder here, I have bin Coke, and I can start it up, and voila, it's not that interesting, but I believe I can do bin version. There you go. There's our version information. I could do bin Coke migrate. There are actually no migrations to run right now, so there's nothing to do here. But it gets better. What was that? It's Go. It's Go. So here I'm going to take this, let me take this binary file, throw it there. And then on my desktop, yeah. What size is that binary? Oops, no, it's on my desktop. It is 19.6 megabytes. But there's not a whole lot there either. It's like an SVG. Well, it depends on how many assets you have. If you have like, giant PDFs and images and videos, I would not recommend putting them in a binary. That's what S3 is for. But yeah, a typical app could have a decent amount of images and stuff. So I put it on my desktop. I'm going to rename my Coke folder to Diet Coke. That way the Go path no longer exists, right? Nothing up my sleeve. I'm wearing short sleeve shirts here. I can run this binary, starting Coke on port 3000. I can refresh. I got assets. I know, right? I'll go to a different browser altogether. Look at that. And it's all running off that single binary that has no access to my Go path or anything like that. It's outside my Go path. The files don't exist. Anyway, very exciting. This is actually how I deploy Go Buffalo. The gobuffalo.io is I build this one binary and push it to Heroku with a binary build pack. So all it has is this one file, and it does everything for me. That Brian Kettleson, who runs Gophercon, is like, that has changed my life. That is his, the fact that he can do it, the fact he can run migrations using that binary is also kind of awesome. Did you have a question? No, you're just raising your hands in joy. Okay, fair enough. Oh, I'm going to put this back to Coke. Let's actually look at some code now that I've shown you how awesome. Oh, actually, let's keep looking at Buffalo command real quick. So there is a REPL. An actual Buffalo, what I call Buffalo console, but it is a REPL. We'll look at that in a little bit. We can interact with our database models, for example, which is pretty awesome. Buffalo Dev, we've seen that, which runs Buffalo in developer mode. Buffalo Generate, which has a few generators right now. Action, which will create many new actions. Buffalo handlers, we'll look at those, and the HTML templates to go with them. Goth, which is a much better version of Omnioth than Gomnioth is, actually. If you haven't, has anybody here ever seen Goth? No? It's, no. Rubbish, just total rubbish, don't use it. Goth, there was this package called Gomnioth, which is just terrible, that did OAuth 2 logins, but now there is Goth, which is much better. It does, well, it lets you do logins with all of these providers. Everything from Amazon to Yammer and in between. So if you want to do third-party OAuth or OAuth 2 logins, your chances are that the one you need is not on this list is pretty slim at this point. It's a couple dozen, and it's a pretty remarkable list that people have contributed. So if you're looking for that, I would highly recommend it. It's pretty sweet. Anyway, we have a generator that kind of sets up Goth in your application for doing login and stuff, which is pretty cool. Resource, so a resource kind of builds an interface that implements list, CRUD, kind of the CRUD stuff, list, show, update, edit, destroy, all that sort of stuff for you. And then Webpack we've already seen. So yeah, let's look at some code here. Let's go into our actions. And life in a Buffalo app starts here in the app.go file within actions. We set up an env variable. By default, we use development, but obviously you change this in production to be what you need. And then everything else magic really happens down here in this app function here, where we define and build our application. And we do that by creating a Buffalo application, and there are two different types. There's standard and there's automatic. I almost always recommend you use automatic. Automatic adds just a few nice extras that standard has. Like standard's pretty basic. Automatic kind of adds some real niceties to everything. So that's there. We're going to add some middleware. So we use POP for our database access. So we've got a little middleware here that'll wrap every request that comes in a database transaction, and it'll commit it or roll it back based on errors that come in. Our home handler, so how are we getting to our home page? We're mapping it to a GET request with slash and home. Now this uses Gorilla Mux under the covers. Who here is familiar with Gorilla Mux? Most people, that's great. So if you can do it in Gorilla Mux, you can do it in Buffalo, which is kind of nice. So you can do, for example, named parameters like that, for example, and now there'll be an ID parameter that came in from the URL field. We also expose, as part of this, you actually get back a path info struct, and on that you can get the original mux from Gorilla Mux that you can do all the crazy Gorilla Mux stuff you want to do on it, is actually available as a return value from this, should you want it. But we wanted to keep the initial interface pretty easy. So if you want the crazy stuff that Gorilla Mux gives you, it's there. But if you don't really care, it is. And finally, we're serving files on our asset path here. And that's it. So that's where the life of a Buffalo app starts. You can set your middleware, you can set your requests. So, I could do app dot, post and put and patch and options and delete and all that sort of stuff. Here, like I said, I can map middleware. I can do, I'll show you this. This is cool. I can create a group. So as part of my group, I can say an API v1 group. All right, and now everything here, if I do get, slash users, hang on, I can type bfunc return nil. Okay, I'm not running Buffalo. Okay, run and start the app. If I go to my home page here, oops, there we go. You notice down here now I've got slash API v1 slash users as part of my routes table. Oh, but yeah, by the way, I show you routes. So for example, the default 404 page, if I were to go to something that didn't exist, see, show you all the routes in your app so you know what you're doing. What did I do wrong? Oh, I did this. Yeah, these are my routes, which is kind of cool, I think anyway. It even shows you what handler it is. GitHub.com, Mark Bates, Coke, actions.homehandler. And then this bottom one's an anonymous action here, but I'm actually able to show you the path to where you're supposed to be, which is very useful in development. Why is this not working? Oh, I don't have it mapped. But back to the group stuff. You notice now, like I said, I'm able to, by creating this group here, API v1, everything I list off it is now going to be under that root. And I can also assign my own middleware to that group. So now that API v1, that might have a particular middleware for doing authentication with, say, JWT tokens that my web app doesn't need. By default, it gets, did you have a question? Okay. By default, it gets it inherits all of the middleware from its parent. And you can do groups off groups off groups, that kind of a thing. And it inherits the middleware off your parents. We do give you full access to the middleware stack. So with this middleware stack, I can do things like clear out all the middleware. So any middleware I've inherited, I can get rid of. I can replace a piece of middleware, which is kind of cool. I can skip middleware. This is one of my favorites that no one else seems to do, where the use case for skipping a piece of middleware is always, I want to authenticate every endpoint of my app except for the home page and the registration page. So I could do that. I can say my middleware, skip, let's see, skip middleware.pop transaction, right, because that actually returns a middleware, and then home handler. So that will skip the database transaction middleware for my home handler. And I can actually give it a whole bunch of them if I wanted to. So that makes it really easy to start building those one-off exceptions for a piece of middleware, right? I don't want to authenticate my home page because no one can get to my site if they're not already logged in. So yeah, so your app here, this is really, like I said, you're going to live here in terms of defining your routes, defining where you're going to put what middleware to use, how to use your middleware, where to group your app, your stuff. And then you're going to have you access this kind of Buffalo app everywhere else that you need it. Does that make sense? Are people like kind of following along with what I'm talking about here? Am I just confusing the hell out of people? A little bit of both? A little bit of both? That's good, okay. You totally can ask questions anytime.
If you have middleware that like an authentication middleware
Yeah.
that needs to pass some user object along, how does that make it the endpoint?
That is a great question. We're going to get there in a minute. Yeah. No. That's a great question. Like, how do we get things from middleware to middleware to middleware to final action? That's your question. Yeah. And that's a totally legitimate question because that's a very useful thing to do. Right. The standard interfaces. We're not using the standard library interface, but yeah. So the other thing I wanted to show you before we start looking at actual handlers and stuff is this render.go file. So we have an interface we use for rendering. It's a very simple interface. You do not have to use that render engine if you do not want to, because the interface to implement a renderer is literally two interfaces, one called content type, which returns a string, which is whatever the content type you're about to render is, and a render function, which takes a piece of data, takes a data map and a writer, I think, and returns an error. But to set up the render engine, we are setting it up here with a few things. We are saying define an HTML layout. So every template you render, it's an HTML template. We're going to render it with this layout here, which by default is application.html. If we look at that really quick. Pretty simple here. We are not using, by the way, Mike Pence just became the Vice President of the United States, so yeah. Which means I'm assuming Donald Trump is now the President of the United States. So we can all just sit for a moment and cry. Yeah, anyway, okay, so we use a, kind of all over the place here, I know, but there's so much, it's so exciting. This here is my application layout that gets generated by default. We use a handlebars style syntax for templates. So if you're familiar with handlebars, you're already kind of good to go. I wanted something that was pretty much everybody kind of knew already from different languages, but also something that was easy to use, easy to work with, and unfortunately I find Go templates very difficult to work with and very difficult to use. They're very strong and powerful, but they're also difficult. But we're not going to go there. Let's go back to our render. Cache templates, we'll cache the templates in production because in development we want to keep changing our templates. We don't want to do that. The whole file resolver thing is a slightly complex thing. Just leave it like this and you'll be fine. And it all has to do with the way Go does lookups of files and dealing with the binary and the local directories and when you can look for something versus when you can't versus an init. It's a thing. Just trust me. It works. Please. Trying to make that a little cleaner at some point. But anyway, so that's kind of rendering. Let's look at an action now, a handler here. GD. There you go. So this here renders our home page. This is the handler interface. It takes a Buffalo context, which as of this weekend will implement the context.context interface. After my conversation with Francesc. Right now it does not, but it will. And it returns an error. That's all we've got to do. So if we look at what is on the context, we get a few kind of fairly interesting things. Bind is really, really interesting. What I love about bind is it takes an interface. You give it a struct, say a user struct, and it will, if it's an HTML request, it'll bind the form to that struct for you. If it is a JSON request, it'll bind the JSON to that for you. If it was an XML request, it'll bind the JSON, bind the XML to you. And of course, you can obviously override. You can do some little bit of composition, include the Buffalo context in your own context, and override the bind to do whatever the hell you want it to do. But it cleans up a ton of code. Buffalo is really just about I just want to get stuff done. I don't want to be like, is this a HTML? Is this JSON? Let me just kind of do it. The data is data that's been set in the context. Error, you can return an error of a particular type. So you can say, I want to return a 500 or a 404 or a 401 error, and here's the error, and here's the status code that goes along with that. Get and set are for setting values on that context, so that answers your question. When you're building middleware, you set the current user in the middleware, and then it propagates down. Parameters, redirect, render, that sort of stuff. Even WebSocket, you can get access to a WebSocket connection right here and start doing WebSocket stuff right out of the gate. In my home page handler here, I'm going to set a bit of data. We'll set a bit of data that's name, right? Mark. That was get. I don't know why I did that. There we go. And then in my index.html file here, just doing all that fun stuff we saw already, I'm just going to say name. There we go. Welcome to Buffalo Mark. Now what's really nice about this is the context is actually passed into the template, so you don't have to do any of like, well, I said all this stuff and now I need to get, how do I get access to it? I've got to kind of pull it out and push it back in again, which kind of happens when you're kind of just gluing a bunch of things together. We make that happen for you, which I think is very nice. Yeah, and questions about that? No? Yeah. 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 Oh, that's a great question. You know, I don't know the answer to that. No, I really don't. I don't, I would think. No, you should never do it. Yeah, it's bad. Yeah. Yeah, I would need to look and see what overrides what, because something's going to override something. The named, well, no, I don't know. Actually, it's a Go question, really, I think. So I know that the named parameters in the URL, not the query string, but the named ones would override everything else. But I don't know what would happen in Go if, you know, how the URL value, or how that stuff is. Oh, yeah, no, sorry. Params are different than the bind stuff. The bind is the body. It's just the body. Yeah. That's it. Yeah. Bind is body. Params are query string and named parameters. Yeah. Hmm?
No, I think it's you can decide which overrides which if you want to do the bind first and parameter.
Well, they're separate. They are separate. Bind only deals with the body of the request. It doesn't deal with the parameters at all. So you would never actually run into that particular issue. The biggest issue you'd run into is if you had a named parameter in your URL, say name, and then someone passes a query string name, their query string will get overwritten by the URL name, the name parameter. That's the only time where that would happen. But in Francesca's case, they're separated. They're not. I can't access form data through my params function. They're separate things. Yeah. Cool. Now I can't remember what I was going to say. Thanks, Francesca. I can't remember what was next. I appreciate it. What? You got other questions? No, that's good. I'm cool. Thanks. No, I seriously can't remember what I was going to. Oh, I was going to show something kind of cool in the file here. I think it's kind of cool. Let's see here. Do pre and I can do params. Speaking of parameters, I can do that, right? So if I do, oops, oh, it's because it doesn't exist. I didn't actually have any parameters. Foo equals bar. Map foo unevaluated format. What? Params. Did I do that wrong? I did that wrong, didn't I? Yeah, I did that wrong. Sorry. Foo? There we go. You can access a foo. You can access a parameter directly by doing params dot and then the name of the parameter in the thing altogether right away. But actually, that actually showed a really cool feature just a second ago. So, what an error page, a development error page looks like. You can see I had an error rendering index.html. Tells me what the error it was. In this case, it was an unsupported eval return. It's a big thing inside the template. But nice big stack trace tells me what I was doing, where I was going. I also do things like I print out the context of that request. What was happening in that request, what is available in the context, and I also print off the routes down the bottom just to let you know what's kind of going on down there. So try to give you as much information as I possibly can to help you debug what's going on in your application. I don't just print out the stack trace, you get a lot more to go with it. Okay, so let's move on to a different package because we're running out of time, I believe. Yeah, we got about 25 minutes here. Assets, CSS, images, JavaScript. Anything that's in CSS will get compiled to one CSS file. Anything that's in JS will get compiled into one JavaScript file. Anything else, any other folders, any other files will get copied and put in the same location as all the other asset stuff in public assets. So rest assured, everything is there, so you can point Nginx at public assets and just serve straight out of there when you deploy or whatever. It's all good, unless you want to serve it out of the bundle. It's up to you, however you want to do it. Griffs are really cool. Love griffs. So griffs are kind of interesting here. So here is a grift, and griffs are little tasks that you might write. So an example of one of these tasks might be seeding your database. When a new developer comes on, you want to seed your database with some basic information. Maybe you want to write a grift to do your deploy, or read in a CSV and shove it in a database. Any of those sorts of repetitive tasks you do on a day-to-day basis as a developer, that's what these little tasks are. That's what these grifts are for. In this particular case here, I've got a little grift called routes. And notice it has full access to my application, Coke, actions, all that sort of stuff. But this is the entire file. There is no main.go in here. If I look at the grifts folder, there's nothing else there. Oops. But if I go to my command, if I go to the terminal window here, I can say grift list. And it's going to show me a list of all my grifts. And I can run grift routes. In this case, it's going to print off my routes for me. So I can put all those little repetitive tasks in this package, not have to worry about defining main files or any of the kind of stuff that goes along to having multiple tasks like this, all these little sub-packages or mains or giant case statements. Grifts kind of does that for you. And I believe, as of recently, you can do grift tasks or grift task. There you go. Buffalo task, rather, something like that, right? Yeah, list. It has the same effect. So in case you're wondering, you can't remember what grifts are. But those are really cool. You can do a lot of really fun stuff with grifts. How I recommend them. Migrations are for migrations. We'll talk about that. Models are for models, database models. Here we go. So by default, we're going to set up a new POP connection for you based off that YAML file. Again, we default to development. Set the debug so you can see SQL queries being printed out in development mode because that's useful for debugging. Public templates we've seen. Templates you can do nesting. You can put users /index.html, and in your actions here, you notice I'm just doing index.html, but in that case I could do users. What's really cool is if you do that, if you give it an MD file, it actually knows how to handle Markdown and will generate the HTML for you. So you don't need to do another step. You can actually just have Markdown. So when you're doing kind of the more brochureware site kind of versions of your... That is weird. Why is that doing that? Is that me or is that the projector? Okay. Yeah, that's fun. So I'll show you here. If I go to Z Buffalo, CD Go Buffalo. If I look at my templates folder for Go Buffalo, which is the documentation site, you can see inside docs I've got a lot of just MD files that they get generated. They get parsed into HTML. They get evaluated just because they're regular files. We also support partials right out of the box, so you can easily split things up. And like Go, partials start with an underscore. You can also pass things into your partials. So I can say, foo equals bar, baz or bvaz, there we go, keep it that, equals baz, that sort of stuff. So if I want to pass in, I'm iterating over something, I want to pass in a single thing, I can do that. It kind of gets its own context and works that way. I can do custom helpers. This panel is actually a custom helper. Let's see what that looks like. So here I'm doing, this is kind of a big custom helper. It's generating a Bootstrap panel for me and all sorts of stuff. But I can do custom helpers by taking in whatever it is I need to take in. In this case, it's just a helper context, but maybe I want to take in strings and args. And wish I had more time to show all this stuff to you. It's so cool. Let's go back to what we're doing here, and let's actually generate a quick model and do something with it. So we can say Buffalo DB user, and that user will have a name. That user will have an email and a bio, which is a null string. So maybe they don't want to give us their bio. Their bio? They don't want to give us their bio because they're polite. And who does? Only English people understand what I'm saying right now, so that's fine. Wow, that was cold, Matt. Thanks, man. I appreciate it. Thanks, man. Well, you got to talk, don't you? Yeah. In like a few minutes. So I can, using the generate command, I can generate this new model here. Did I do that right? Nope, I did not. It's a DB model. Sorry, it's under the DB command. I don't know my own framework. There we go. It's going to create a couple things for us. It's going to create a user model, a user test model, a user test, and an up and down migration for me. So if we go back here, am I in the right project? I am. If I look at my user model here, oh, it's nulls string, isn't it? All right. There we go. That's better. Creates a new user with an ID type. That's a UUID. You can actually change that to int if you really wanted to. Created at updated timestamps, name, email, and then the null string here. Also generates some nice helper functions to make it a stringer. Generates a collection type of type users. Tries to implement some basic validations for you. In this case, that it's the first name, that the name and the email are both valid, so that's they work, and generates a couple other empty validate methods for you. Now, our migrations, we look at our migrations here. Support two different types of migrations. One is the DSL kind of migration, which is called Fizz. And this creates a users table. What's nice about this is this works in SQLite, Postgres, and MySQL, just like kind of Rails does. And since I mistyped that, that should actually be text. That's actually what I was looking for there. And because I mistyped it, that should be null true. That would have worked had I typed it correctly, by the way. just saying. If I hadn't screwed it up, that would have worked and generated this for us. So it also supports SQL migrations. So if you just want to write pure SQL, you can, but obviously it's not very portable. But with this now, I can do Buffalo DB migrate. There we go. I've created my migrations. I've run my migrations. I now have the table. I now have a model. And let's load up the console. Woohoo, a console, yeah, baby. And let's import Mark Bates, Coke, models. And so now I can do models.user, right? There we go. So I have access to the user model. I know your mind is blown. I can see it in your eyes, right? Isn't this awesome? Yeah. So let's try to save a new model here. So I'll do it with the validations to see what happens. So capture that. I can do models.db create models.user, create an empty user, assignment mismatch. Oh, because I supposed to create and validate was what I was looking for, and validate. Undefined method has no connected create or validate. What the hell is it then? DB. I really should learn what my own stuff is. Create. Or is it create and save and create? Save and validate? No, I can't remember what it is. We'll just do the save one because I can't think anymore. Models.create without the validation. Oops. Models, user, we'll say name is Mark. Email is noneyo@business.com. And undefined method equals undefined method error. Did I not type error? Or did I do that wrong? Oh, I didn't do that wrong. Did I? Oh, that was, yep, that was me. Oh, sorry, models.db. We're getting there. Getting tired. It's been a long day. Yay! I inserted a user. And we can get that user here by user. And models.db, first user. And there we go, there's my user, u.name. It's Mark. You can see it actually works. That's pretty cool stuff. I think it's pretty cool stuff.
That's pretty cool.
See, that's pretty cool stuff. Yeah. Does it do the REPL? It does not, but there's no reason why I couldn't put it in. It'd be in production. Yeah, there's no reason why you couldn't. That's a great point. Yeah, I'll add that to the, open an issue if you could so I can remember it past today. Because clearly I'm getting a bit punchy. But yeah, so now we actually have a user in our database, which is kind of cool. I think maybe we should write a grift just to see that we've got a user. And I'm just going to tack it onto this here real quick. So var underscore equals, we'll say add list. And that takes and then we'll say what? We'll do just what we just did there. Actually, we'll do all the users, right? We'll get all the users from the database. Models users. And that's the wrong package. Thanks, Go Imports. Go Imports is awesome until you have two of the exact same thing in two different packages. And we'd say models DB. What? How did I get there? Anybody else see that? That was weird. I don't even know what that was. All users, and we'll be good citizens, make sure we don't have any errors, and then we'll just print off all the users. Print line. Here we go, return nil. So now we have a little command we can run that will go and look at all the database users, look at all the users in the database. I can say grift list. I named it the same thing as another command because I'm good. Thank you very much. Told you, I'm getting punchy. Getting late in the day. Here we go. Pulled all the users out of the database. Did the correct thing. That's pretty awesome. Very excited by that. Looks like we added that user several times, but that's okay, because we ran the command a couple times, didn't we? So finally, we could just, we'll add a quick little action here that prints that users out to the screen, and we'll call it a day. How's that sound? Yeah, that sounds good, Mark. Love it. Okay. We'll do buffalo, G, action, users, You have a question? 5 minutes. Okay, we can do this in 5 minutes. Buffalo, that's the power of Buffalo. Buffalo, G, action, users, list. Look at that. It's going to create a users folder with a list.html in it. It's going to create an action called a users file under action. It's even going to create users tests. And it's going to run Go imports on everything I just did. Make sure it's all nice and fumped and clean for me. So now let's open up users. This users action here. And actually, that's exactly what I wanted to do here. But let's do that database, same database query we just did. Users, models, users, and just change it to the correct package again. Mark Bates, Coke. There we go. Error equals models, db, all. Get all of the users, all of the things. Again, if there's an error, we're going to return it. We're going to set this onto our context. Oops. I opened up the test file. Users. And then users list. Here we go. Each. Users as user. You don't actually need the add as, but I like it because otherwise it uses these weird instance variables, which is a handlebars thing. And then we'll just do a pre-tag. How's about that? Pre, and I'll use a built-in helper called inspect the user. Okay, so if I did all that correctly, this should end with a successful demo. Oh, I forgot to map my, add the mapping here. App get / user, oops, that's not valid go, is it? App, sorry, I use single quotes. What was it? Users to the users list action. Oops, get. There we go. Binary started up. I can go back to, I can go to users. Look at that. Thank you very much. There we go. That is Buffalo in a nutshell. There's more to it. I highly recommend checking out gobuffalo.io. I've got stickers for those who want stickers. And that is it. Go see Matt's talk, closing keynote. I'll be at the bar restaurant tonight. So thank you very much.